Hello, everyone. It's John Pollock, and this is your UFC 297 review from the card that went down on Saturday night from the Scotiabank Arena in Toronto, Ontario. It was certainly not the card of the year, but it was an event that had many stories going in, many stories coming out of it. The key ones being that we have a new UFC middleweight champion in Dricus du Plessis, who defeated Sean Strickland on Saturday night in a very close fight that can be argued both ways, and we'll get into that and the breakdown of that fight. And Raquel Pennington becoming the newest UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion. She defeating Mayra Bueno Silva by unanimous decision and continues the lineage at 135 pounds. We will talk about that as well. Not a great night for Team Canada, as the sole women that got their arms raised, Jasmine Jasdavicius and Gillian Robertson, were the only ones to represent Canadians with W's, because all of the male Canadians on the card suffered defeats. This was a other side of the coin performance when it comes to the contrast with UFC 289 last June. A pretty magical night in Vancouver. This was a case of sort of I'm not even going to call it a step back. It was a sense of, several. This was a bit of a litmus test when it came to a lot of the narrative going in. It's an easy story to go with the state of Canadian MMA, that of course one card becomes that deciding factor, but it's really not. When you're going into things, naturally you're going to ask those questions about comparisons to the prior era. There is this monumental shadow that so many of these fighters in this country compete under, that being of a George St. Pierre that was a transformational figure in mixed martial arts, much less just Canadian MMA as well. But we'll talk about all of that. We're going to get into the press conference afterwards. I will discuss that as well, and we are also going to get into some of the news and notes. So this was an event that I got to cover live on Saturday, and it had been quite some time since I had covered a UFC live in person for a number of reasons, but was back on Saturday. And where I was stationed was in the back, and was there to speak to a number of the fighters after their contest. We got to speak with pretty much all of the winners after their fights, and it was a very late night. These East Coast shows are something else. I know that there are people in other time zones that are probably not exactly shedding tears, but it was, I want to say, it was 3:30 in the morning when I got out of that arena. And long gone were any crowds of any sort at that time, an hour in Toronto. But yes, a very late night, but we got to hear from all of the key people, including Dricus du Plessis and Raquel Pennington. We'll have some of that audio, as well as other people that I got to speak with at the press conference, with other members of the media who were stationed there in the back. So we're going to start off with the main event and the headline. It is Dricus du Plessis, the new middleweight champion, Sean Strickland, making the first defense of his 185-pound championship. They went the distance, and it was 48-47 cards on both sides before the ruling was made. Dricus du Plessis winning by split decision. And this was a fight that, going in, I mean, you had the questions of, here is someone in Dricus du Plessis, a champion in KSW, a champion in South Africa, and never had he gone to the fourth and fifth rounds. And the conventional wisdom was, that's going to be the X factor here, because we have not seen du Plessis go to the fourth and fifth rounds. And that's not a mark against him. That's only an unknown. And that's what we are assessing here. Sean Strickland is somebody that has been, his cardio and his conditioning for those late rounds have been hallmarks for him. This is someone that, I mean, in this fight, we'll go through some of the stats here, but here is a guy that does exceptionally well at distance. He is also someone that maybe more of an underrated aspect to his game is the level of damage that this guy takes to his legs throughout these fights. I mean, in this fight, he absorbed 24 leg kicks throughout the fight. And really, you could not see a diminished Sean Strickland when it came to that. We go back, and against Israel Adesanya, he absorbed 34 leg kicks. I mean, this is somebody that can just kind of walk through that damage. And he is, as much as the personality of Sean Strickland is so focused upon, and you see him throughout fight week and screaming like to the death, when he is in there, he is locked, he is dialed, and this was someone like his jab was sensational on this night, and Dricus du Plessis was wearing the effects of that jab throughout the fight. Both of these individuals, I mean, they were trying to create as awkward a style for the other to figure out, and both had to go through significant damage very early in the fight. Dricus du Plessis had his left eye shut and said it was the first time in his career that he couldn't see out of one eye. And it was in between rounds. He was able to get the swelling down, but that was one handicap he had to fight through. Sean Strickland later did post a statement just about the fact of a headbutt that he had to weather. Dricus du Plessis, at least at the press conference, did not recall any such collision of heads during the fight. But I mean, that sometimes is many things can occur in a fight that maybe you are not aware of at the time, but that remains to be seen. I'm sure both men will be looking back at these 25 minutes. This was following a championship fight in the Bantamweight title fight that was not exactly having this audience at the edge of their seats. It was, you can certainly separate the story of Raquel Pennington winning a championship after all these years with what the actual fight was in a vacuum. It was not a tremendous fight. For the main event, this is not going to be the fight of the year, but I thought it was a really compelling battle. And you had, it was a very close fight that going to the judges' scorecards, this was one where I thought whatever the outcome is, there are going to be people upset. It was that close. And I didn't monitor like too much outrage over the contest. But so this will be a little bit different because as we are, just to convey my setup, in the back, we are in the media section. So sometimes during the fights, they would be bringing back winners. And thus we were in the midst of, you'd have one eye on the interview subject and you're trying to get your questions in and trying to have your other eye on the monitor to be following the fight. So for some fights, we're not going to have the most detailed of breakdowns. More so we'll focus sort of on the story coming out of this. But, I think most, I would at least say a decent majority saw this as a 3-2 fight for Dricus du Plessis. I scored it 48-47 for du Plessis, thinking that Strickland won rounds 1 and rounds 5. It seemed that round 3 was the real swing round that, I mean, quite honestly, you could make your cases for several of these rounds. I mean, some were more definitive than others, but this was overall, a very close fight, but I did feel that the judges got this right. And let's focus on those first. Derek Cleary had it 48-47 for du Plessis, as did Eric Colon. They both had identical scorecards as well. Each of them, same as me. They gave Strickland 1 and 5 and the middle rounds to du Plessis. Sal D'Amato was the one dissenting judge that did have it for Strickland, giving him rounds 1, 3, and 5. So the judges, the one round they did not agree on was round 3. That seemed to be the closest. Media scores, I mean, it's almost right down the middle that you had nearly half and half, maybe a slight few in favor of du Plessis. In a nutshell, I think we have a middleweight title picture that the immediate question is Israel Adesanya and how long he is going to be out. There were some whispers that he might have been in Toronto to be seated cage side to watch this fight. Did not appear in Toronto on Saturday night. That would be maybe your front runner to be fighting Dricus du Plessis. But the question is Israel Adesanya. I mean, his comments had been, I mean, he's sort of talked about taking a while away before coming back, but certainly he would seem to be the front runner to fight Dricus du Plessis next. In the absence of that, there is Khamzat Chimaev, whose name is being thrown out. Dricus du Plessis certainly does not seem sold on the idea of fighting Khamzat Chimaev, given that he has had one fight against really a converted welterweight in Kamaru Usman in terms of a high-ranking opponent at 185 pounds. But I think that we have a group of middleweights that could very well be seeing each other several occasions. I do not think this is the last Dricus du Plessis Sean Strickland fight we are going to see. Sean Strickland will probably fight for this championship again in as short as one more fight to get him back here. And given the schedules, I mean, Khamzat Chimaev, you cannot bank on when he will be able to come back. Same with Israel Adesanya. If they are in a situation where we need a card to fill, we need a championship fight, and we need a contender, I think that they will be naturally leaning on someone like Sean Strickland. And believe me, this week, for whatever you want to say about Sean Strickland and whatever your personal agreements or disagreements with him are in terms of what he says, he was the most popular fighter on this card. And here was a show that on paper, I mean, fine card, but to do the level of business that this card did, yes, it has been since 2018 that the UFC has been here, but to do a $7.9 million gate, that's a big feather in the cap of a Sean Strickland that this card was in essence built around. Like, he was the number one star on this show. And that is going to be a lot of currency for Sean Strickland when it comes to his positioning and his star power in the UFC, regardless of a championship. And then, once we get out of that, those four fighters at middleweight, including Dricus du Plessis, Robert Whittaker is going to be fighting Paulo Costa next month. But at that point, we're getting a little further down. Jared Cannonier, can he make a run and get another championship fight? All these are in play, but I look at those four in du Plessis, Strickland, Adesanya, and I throw in Khamzat Chimaev there. I think those four kind of is what our title picture is going to look like for the next 12 to 18 months. But let's quickly just circle back to the fight. As I said, I saw Strickland winning the first round. I thought that he, immediately was attacking with the jab, cracked him with a right hand at the end. In the second, it was Strickland continuing with the jab. He had a lot of success with that. But du Plessis was getting several strikes in and was sort of going for takedowns. And he explained to us afterwards, it was sort of, especially in the first round, wanting to get that takedown as sort of a kind of a finality to the round to put something in the heads of the judges. Now, a simple takedown should not be swaying if the damage has been done. And that did not win du Plessis the first round. But in the second, he continued with the takedowns, and that was something that was there for him. And Strickland gets cut by the right eye. This is when du Plessis already has his left eye swollen. So both were dealing with those issues with their eyes and that ability to handicap them. Into the third, it's du Plessis throwing a lot of left hands, putting a good amount of pressure on him. Again, this was the swing round that you could argue either way, and depending on who you scored this round for, that's probably who you had winning the fight. This would have been the most contentious of the 5 rounds. Another aspect to du Plessis, and we'll hear from him in a minute discussing this, was his success with the kicks. He was found those openings. He was exerting a lot of energy, but this was not a guy in du Plessis who was emptying his gas tank. I mean, he put a lot of energy. He put a lot into his output, but was someone that he was good for the 25 minutes. I mean, that question was answered on this night in terms of du Plessis and what does he look like if a round 4 and a round 5 presents itself to him. But going back, we go to the 4th round, and Strickland is continuing to land with his right, was having some good success before a trip takedown. And then it was du Plessis getting on the gas here and landing with a combination. There was a head kick and then a takedown. It seemed like that was sort of his exclamation point at the end of several rounds, was getting in that final takedown. And then in the 5th round, I thought this was the best round of the 5. And it was a Strickland round. He was entering, he was connecting, and both of them. It was interesting to hear the audience that was so pro Strickland. And by the 5th round, flipping, and you were getting the DDP chant at the Scotiabank Arena. But Strickland was still utilizing that jab, but body kicks from du Plessis, and both men just kind of going for it in these final 60 seconds before the judges read the scorecards. Strickland exceptionally gracious in defeat. This was not, did not treat this like it was a robbery or complaining. He was very respectful towards Dricus du Plessis, and both men, I think, came out of this week. When you contrast to how this began and the fact that we had the kind of stuff that was brought up about Sean Strickland's childhood, and then we had the fight at 296 last month, to where by fight week, you would have think this was at a boiling point, and instead, the two really cooled things down between themselves privately, and then were sharing kind of what their exchange had been offline. And the fact that by the time we got to fight week, here were two fighters that I think understood they had a great amount of respect for one another, and you saw that in the embedded series, and you saw it even after the fact here with du Plessis and how he really complimented Sean Strickland. But when we look at at Strickland. I mean, here was the some of the stats courtesy of UFC stats. Total strikes, it was Sean Strickland landing 183 compared to 140 for du Plessis. The output ahead for Sean Strickland when it came to what he threw 419 strikes in total, landing 183 of them. No takedown attempts by Sean Strickland compared to 6 that du Plessis completed out of 11 attempts. So that was a big factor for du Plessis, that he found the wrestling and initiated that, continued it throughout the fight as well. And when it came to the leg damage, as we mentioned, 24 leg kicks to 6 for Sean Strickland. And du Plessis, this was a big performance for him in terms of what this was on his shoulders going in. They had a tremendous reaction of the crowd that had gathered in South Africa watching this at about 7:30 in the morning local time, and just a huge celebratory reaction when the decision was read that they showed on the screen for du Plessis to see as well. So Dricus du Plessis is your new middleweight champion. And at this time, we're going to go to the post-fight press conference. And this was a couple of questions that I got in chatting with du Plessis about the game plan going into the 4th and 5th rounds and what this fight meant to him.
On the facial injuries, are there any other injuries you're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, the body feels pretty banged up right now, but I can't say for sure how severe these injuries are.
You were having a lot of success with the kicks throughout the fight. Was that something that you saw going into this that would be a key part of your strategy, or was that something that just became available throughout the fight and you saw the success and kept with it?
Yeah, no, this is something we worked, we saw in all of his fights. He's really good at evading these kicks. We saw with Israel Adesanya, he wasn't very successful with his kicks because of Sean's defense. I got a few good head kicks in. I got a few good low kicks in. It was just the timing that we had figured out a little bit better than Izzy did in that fight. But yeah, anytime you're going to fight a guy with a strong and good jab, I thought, my coaches, Coach Manova, he's obviously a genius when it comes to these things. We looked at the fight and said, that's how we're going to take care of a jab. And those kicks did start to hurt him by round number 3. 100%, and his jab became a lot lighter in that 3rd round, definitely.
You also answered a lot of questions going into the 4th and 5th rounds for the first time in your career. Can you just tell us, especially that going into the 5th round, sort of what your corner is telling you, and mentally, are you just on autopilot at that point? Like, take us through your emotions, just preparing for those final 5 minutes.
No, not at all. I mean, I went into the 5th round and I said to my coach, wow, can you believe it? I guess I have a gas tank. And he said, this is the last 15 minutes of your life. And I said, damn straight. And, we basically, I was happy to be there in that 5th round. It wasn't autopilot at all. It was, damn, I feel great for a 5th round. When we went to the 4th round, I felt, damn, I'm going to prove a lot of people wrong tonight.
That was your new UFC middleweight champion, Dricus du Plessis, winning by split decision against Sean Strickland. And he was throwing out the idea that, if the right offer comes his way, like, he would be around to turn around as quickly as UFC 300. And we'll talk a bit about that as well coming up. So there you have it. That was our main event of the show. And now we will move on to the co-feature, which was for the Vacant Bantamweight Championship. Amanda Nunes in attendance for this card as well in Toronto. It was Raquel Pennington taking on Mayra Bueno Silva. And going in, I mean, this was a fight that was very much maligned from the time that it was announced. It is a tough position when you are coming off the era of the dominant champion of the last era, and she has not lost the title. She had the hiccup with Juliana Pena, but avenged that, and now it is moving on with that kind of on your shoulders. Not all unlike when George St. Pierre stepped away in 2013. Little different circumstances there when you had such a close fight with Johnny Hendricks, and many people thinking Hendricks beat George St. Pierre. And then Hendricks, when he became the official welterweight champion the next year, he was accepted a lot more in terms of that because of the performance against George. We have seen Amanda Nunes against Raquel Pennington, and this was her first championship fight since that time back in 2018. So this fight, I think just in the most basic of terms, I thought that Mayra Bueno Silva was in over her head in this fight. It was easily the biggest fight of her career. The Holly Holm performance was a really spectacular one and submitting a former champion in Holm, but I think some of that got clouded with the drug test afterward that she explained was for her ADHD medication that she tested positive for this ritalinic acid. Not to say that like you downplay the performance from that, but I don't think she fully got the effect of that win that going into this fight. I mean, at essence, I mean, this is not as though she was just so overmatched on paper going into this fight, but I think people realize like this is going to be quite the transitional period for the women's 135-pound weight class, and that will continue after this fight. They went the full 25 minutes, and Silva, I did think, won the first round. She was after eating a pair of elbows, she started landing knees from the tie clinch and got the takedown by the fence and got Pennington's back. And as Pennington stands, Silva is still on the back and drags Pennington down and secured the back and landed punches from behind. And you thought like this is a path to victory in terms of if she is able to secure back control on a semi-consistent basis in this fight, those submission opportunities are going to present themselves for Silva. But Pennington had the better wrestling. She was able to get on top and leave Silva on her back, where she absorbed a lot of strikes. This was the reversal in round 2. In the third, it was Pennington working on top in half guard, connecting with hammer fists. Into the fourth, the crowd is getting very restless by this point. Silva did try for a rear naked choke, but Pennington got out of danger and some big hammer fists on top. Ends the round on top with an elbow. So it was the top game pressure from Pennington that was banking these rounds, and wash, rinse, repeat in the 5th round. Pennington's mounted Silva in the 5th, threatened with an arm triangle, and then resorted to ground and pound. And Silva did stay on the back as Pennington kicked away. This was Silva just, I think at the end of this fight, like here you are, you're well down on the scorecards, and she just stayed on her back, and Pennington just kicked away at her legs. It was a very uneventful end to what was an uneventful fight, but one that does come with the significance of Raquel Pennington, after all of these years, being in the UFC for over a decade and becoming the women's bantamweight champion. Scores were 49-46, 49-46, and 49-45. Your winner, Raquel Rocky Pennington. The clear direction is Juliana Pena. That would be the most logical contender to be fighting Raquel Pennington next. I think that is all but assumed at this point coming out of this fight. And again, I think you do have to separate. There's going to be a lot of criticism for this fight, but at the same time, I think a lot of people that look at Raquel Pennington, I mean, this is somebody that, they brought this up on the broadcast, like breaking her back at the age of 19. And then in 2017, a devastating knee injury that would have retired some fighters. What she has come back from is incredible. And there are not too many fighters that you look at that are, 10 plus years into their UFC tenure that are fighting for a UFC championship. Now, that does come with the caveat. This bantamweight division is in flux, and there's not a dearth of contenders. You do have the obvious one at this point in Juliana Pena, but I think you're talking about a division that is standing on the shoulders of giants in Ronda Rousey, in the I would couple that era with Miesha Tate and Holly Holm, and then Amanda Nunes as well, who from 2016 onward has been the dominant force, save for the one loss to Juliana Pena. But here we are going to check in with Raquel Pennington. I actually thought this was like the most insightful answer that I personally got on the night from Raquel Pennington. If you rewind back to Media Day on Wednesday, I mean, she was speaking about the fact that she was just in such a positive space. And I asked her on Wednesday about the first championship fight she had with Amanda Nunes and whether that was considered sort of the be all end all for her, was this championship. It is feast or famine, win or lose against Amanda Nunes. And this was the opposite. This was another fight to her. And this was not the be all end all. And so I wanted to kind of expand on that. We heard her answer beforehand and now after the fact of just what this fight meant to her. So here is your new bantamweight champion.
At Media Day on Wednesday, you were stating how great your mindset was throughout this camp going into this fight and trying to just treat it like any other fight. Was that the case as the days got closer, the hours got closer, or were you just having a great poker face this week going into it?
No, I mean, it's been a great week and my mindset has been really good. Today was actually a very interesting day for me. People want to learn the story behind things, and so this is one of them. I woke up this morning, and to be in this position, this is something people dream of. This is what I've dreamed of, again, for the last 5 years, but this is something I've worked hard for, and, I remember back in the day I said I wanted to be one of the first women into the UFC, and people laughed at me, and I was like, and then I'm going to be a champion, and people laughed at me again. And to get here, and I woke up this morning and, literally questioned everything. If you can't hear it in my voice, I woke up so sick. And I had to spend a lot of the morning talking with my coaches, my sports psychologist, Tisha. I had to dig deep and pull out and, really find the champion mindset. Because as a person, I did break this morning. But, it wasn't a poker face all week. I've been solid in my thoughts and everything that I was going to go out there and do. And then it took I sat here and did a session with my sports psychologist and slowly started gathering myself. And then they brought my little girl around. And I seen how beautiful she looked, and I was like, all right, I'm not quitting. I'm going out there, and I'm doing this. It doesn't matter how I feel.
So that was Raquel Pennington. I just thought that was such an insightful answer that you get into the head of a fighter going into however she wants to define it, whether it's just another fight for her or it's everything wrapped into 25 minutes. The fact is that it's a huge moment in your career, and the mental side of it is so there's a reason why we fixate sometimes, maybe too much sometimes, on the mental side of fighting, because that is such a huge element to it. And even somebody that is coming in with that proper mindset and the experience of fighting for a championship, that here the day of, this is what a fighter is going through. And I just thought that was a very revealing answer in terms of just getting to the cage for herself on Saturday, and is now a bantamweight champion. So let's move on. Next fight up was so this was the end of the run of Canadian fighters. Mike Malott was leading the charge into UFC 297 and looked to be on his way to getting his arm raised at the Scotiabank Arena. But Neal Magny, the veteran of now 30 UFC fights going back to 2013, huge come from behind victory in the third round. Mike Malott was attacking with inside leg kicks early on in the second, got a takedown, worked to half guard, mounted Magny, and it seemed that he was just moments away from a decision victory. Got another takedown into the third and is working inside of Magny's guard, tried for a guillotine and gets thrown down to the mat, and it's Magny with the ground and pound, and then he moves to mount and finishes Malott with 15 seconds to go in the round. If this goes 15 seconds more, it's a 29-28 win for Mike Malott, and Neal Magny gets the victory. There was quite a great story that Neal Magny shared afterwards, is that he had a 6 a.m. flight out of Toronto to get home for his son's 4th birthday, because a year ago he missed his son's birthday because he was in Brazil. That was the fight against Gilbert Burns, and he missed his son's birthday. So he was probably going to be going on no sleep, and at least does have the W on his way home. For Mike Malott, this is his first loss in a decade, and one that I think this will certainly show you, this kind of adversity and how he comes back from it. He is, I think, still a very highly touted prospect at 170 pounds, and he is now 3-1 in the UFC, but it has been a long time since he sustained a loss. We're talking over 9 years since the last loss, and that was way back against Hakeem Dawodu. This will be a challenging recovery for a Mike Malott in terms of how he handles it on the mental side of being in Toronto and being so close to victory. But sometimes that one step back can be what propels you into the evolution of your career. Mike Malott he is 32 years old, certainly not at an age where you can discount him making a run at welterweight. But it was a big win for Neal Magny, who remains sort of just this Iron Man at 170 pounds, and with the number of fights that he has had. And afterwards, very characteristic, just stating he wants to stay busy in 2024. And I think everyone looking at his history believes that he will. When you look at the quality of fighter that it takes to beat a Neal Magny. Like, yes, you look at his UFC record. He is now 22-8 in the UFC, which the first thing that jumps out at you is the number of UFC fights. That alone is impressive. And then when you look at 8 losses, it's like, okay, that's a fair number of losses. Listen to these names that get to claim a victory over Neal Magny in the UFC. Damian Maia, Lorenz Larkin, Rafael Dos Anjos, Santiago Ponzinibbio, Michael Chiesa, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Gilbert Burns, and then Ian Machado Gary. I mean, like, that tells you why there is like Ian Gary. That was a quality win for him against Neal Magny when you're talking about being in fairly elite class at 170 pounds that are able to hold a victory against Neal Magny. Moving on down the card, and next we'll go to Chris Curtis taking on Marc-André Barriault, and this one also going the distance. And this was a pretty rabid crowd. Chris Curtis came out to Edge's theme music, Adam Copeland by Alter Bridge. Not going to the worst name of a song maybe in recording artist history, but Chris Curtis getting the win by split decision, 30-27 twice, and one judge 29-28 for Marc-André Barriault. This was one where we were just super deep in interview, so I really only got to see much of the first round. So apologies for the lack of analysis on this fight. But Curtis now improves to 5-2 with a no contest throughout his UFC tenure. He had been coming off a no contest against Nasruddin Imavov back in June at 289 on that card in Vancouver. He's had many fights in Canada, and also a training partner with Sean Strickland. So he was excellent at the post-fight press conference. If you want to go seek that out, and just like speaking about Sean Strickland and his own reaction to the fans here in Canada as well, and sort of the crowd got on these two for, I guess, their perceived lack of action that there was in this fight. And Chris Curtis was after, like, joking, like, hey, I'm sorry, we didn't kill each other. But Curtis gets the W here, and a good win at middleweight. Marc-André Barriault is someone that has largely been a 500 fighter in the UFC and had won his last 2, so running into a speed bump here in Chris Curtis. The pay-per-view main card opened up with I would say, pretty important fight at featherweight, with the undefeated Movsar Evloev defeating Arnold Allen by unanimous decision. And the big question of this was going to be the wrestling. Like, Evloev has outstanding wrestling and believes he has the best wrestling at 145 pounds. Arnold Allen is like, his takedown defense is exceptional, and that was going to be sort of where the rubber meets the road in this match, and who was going to be able to dictate things. And it was Evloev getting the unanimous decision, scores of 29-28 across the board. And let's take a look at the judges' decisions here. I think they were all in agreement on this one in terms of the round distribution for Evloev and Allen. And we had Judge Eric Colon scoring the first 2 rounds for Evloev, as did Patricia Vandermeer and Salim Hanif. They both had the first 2 rounds for Evloev and the third to Arnold Allen, which kind of was as expected. Allen threatened with a ninja choke in the 3rd round, and Evloev rolled away, got to his back. It was actually like a really tremendous escape by Evloev and transition to the back. I mean, Evloev, if you want to see kind of his wrestling and how it is prepared for like mixed martial arts wrestling, like the Granby rolls that he had and transitions in the 1st round were a thing of beauty. The biggest controversy in this came in the 3rd round when Allen charged at Evloev with a series of knees while Evloev was putting his hand down towards the mat. And you had the confusion that I think is always going to exist when you have all these different rules from state to state. It's sort of, and believe me, it's not like an excuse not to know the rules, but you get that confusion on the broadcast of like, where are we right now? Is it palms down? Is it just one hand touches? In this case, like, neither knee was down, so you were like, quote unquote, playing the game here with the hand down, and you had all this confusion about, hey, are these knees legal or not? And Mark Goddard stepped in and explained to Arnold Allen that he knows that they were not intentional. You're getting a hard warning, but essentially that these were several illegal knees, and this busted open Evloev at the side of the head. Like these were the most significant damage in the whole round was, or the whole fight, I should say, for Arnold Allen, and would have made a big difference in the fight. And Marc Ramondi over at ESPN afterwards did get clarification on this regarding the knees, stating that apparently in Ontario, the original rule is used for grounded fighters. Prior to the several changes that have been made in other jurisdictions over the years, weight bearing does not matter. If any part of the body other than the soles of the feet are on the mat, a blow to the head from a kick or knee is illegal. One of those knees were illegal under that version. Referee Mark Goddard halted the action but didn't take a point, did the best job he could considering. And there you go. So that was, I would say, the biggest controversy when it came to the rules of the fight, and stating that at least one of these knees connected while the hand was down for Evloev. But the fight did continue, Evloev getting the unanimous decision, and this will propel him. I mean, he is now in the mix at featherweight at 18-0. He is someone I don't think he's fighting next for the title. You have Volkanovski and Ilya Topuria next month, and maybe Evloev has another fight in his path, but at the very least, I do envision that he is going to, like, at worst, I think he's probably headlining a fight night next. I think we're due for a 5-round Movsar Evloev fight at 145 pounds, and that will become very interesting, especially if you're taking a Max Holloway out of the mix. Like when he goes up to take this fight with Justin Gaethje coming up in April, is this just a one-off for Holloway like we saw against Dustin Poirier at 155 pounds and he reverts back to 145? Or if Holloway's out of the featherweight division, I mean, it is a clear path for several contenders, because that was one of the interesting factors of, Holloway taking this fight with Gaethje, is that, if Topuria wins this title next month, like Max Holloway is right there. So anyway, Movsar Evloev, Dana White was not as complimentary about this fight, but it was, still to me, it was like one of the more intriguing fights on this entire card. For some, it was the most intriguing just because of, a real quality opponent in Arnold Allen and what this meant for Evloev past this test. Let's quickly go through the undercard here. So again, not a great night for Canadian content. Garrett Armfield defeated Brad Katona by unanimous decision. I gave Armfield the second and third, Katona winning the first on my scorecard. Garrett Armfield, I mean, he has a great gas tank, and he was able to deal with Brad Katona, who was very aggressive with his takedown attempts, and Armfield just kind of met him in the pocket, landing with a lot of right hands, particularly in the second round. And it was Katona getting the takedown late in the second, but Armfield right back up, and Katona just working for more takedowns in the third before we went to the judges' scorecards. Charles Jourdain and Sean Woodson, this one also going the distance, and this had the most unique reading of scorecards and reactions afterwards. So we had a split decision win for Sean Woodson, and first of all, I had it 29-28 for Sean Woodson winning the first and second round. Woodson just has this guy is a featherweight with a reach of 78 inches. He had a 9-inch reach over Charles Jourdain, and that's is just an incredible wingspan here. And Woodson he's a very awkward striker to decipher and to work around, and I think you could sense that with Jourdain. Jourdain did threaten with a guillotine in the third, but Woodson popped out his head, and we went to the scorecards, and the card was read accurately, but Charles Jourdain, after it's announced as Sean Woodson winning, Jourdain is the one that celebrates. And momentarily, Woodson is watching Jourdain and just accepting that he lost. And then later, it was just so loud they could not hear. And then you just had like almost this like pause. And then you got to just watch two men that were suddenly winner, loser, and then flip spots. And all of a sudden, it's Woodson realizing, oh, no, you won. And Jourdain, oh, no, you lost. It was bizarre that you would have to watch here. Woodson explained to us after, like, he had a really rough training camp here, nearly had to pull out, and stated that of the actual time he had to prepare for this, he had like 3 weeks in total of real training for this camp. But he's a great personality, and he came into this an underdog. I mean, Jourdain was a -205 favorite going into this fight. So for Sean Woodson, like a very nice record on paper. He's now 11-1-1 at featherweight and unbeaten in his last 5 contests. Serhiy Sidey and Ramon Taveras. This was supposed to be a bantamweight fight, but Taveras came in at 139.75 pounds. So just about 4 pounds over the limit of 136. This was a rematch from last September when they met on the Contender Series, and Sidey won that fight by TKO, but there was a lot of contesting of that fight, of it being an early stoppage. So they booked the rematch, and they had a war for 3 rounds. Like, certainly, fight of the night went to the main event between Strickland and du Plessis. This, I mean, you had Taveras missing weight, and therefore you're typically not included in any bonuses. But this could have been your fight of the night, and I think for many it was. I thought Taveras won the first round with his body shots that did seem to affect Taveras. In the second, Sidey, he got his nose busted open, and he was leaking. It was a faucet coming out of his nose that he had to contend with. Taveras is stopping multiple takedowns, and then Sidey continues to go to the body, landed a head kick, and then followed with just tons of pressure here. So I had it even going into the third. Taveras did land a kick to the body in the third, and Sidey is going at him in the pocket, lands a flying knee and a head kick in the final minute. So I had it 29-28 for Serhiy Sidey. The judges, 2 of them went the other way, 29-28 for Ramon Taveras, 1 scorecard for Serhiy Sidey. What was interesting about this one is that if you go to MMA decisions, the media scores, at least as of last night, every single media member had this 29-28 for Serhiy Sidey. And I'm looking at it. Yes, a unanimous 29-28 account of this fight by the media members. So there you go. Possible that we could get a third round between these two in the sense of the Contender Series follow-up and this one. But we'll see. These two probably are tired of preparing for one another after back-to-back fights. But nonetheless, I thought it was a very good performance from Serhiy Sidey, as it was Ramon Taveras. He explained that he needs to get a nutritionist, and pretty much just a wake-up call on his weight cut to not let it get to this point again. I mean, not only is it difficult for the fighter to have to deal with such a weight discrepancy, but it's costing you as well, part of your purse. Gillian Robertson got a TKO victory against Polyana Viana. She looked excellent in this fight. Big round in the first, getting the takedown, threatened with an arm triangle, and then moved to the armbar, but Viana withstood. In the second, Robertson got the back, mounted her, and just started dropping shots, elbows, and got the stoppage at 3:12 of the second round. So Gillian Robertson, that was her 16th fight in the UFC, the most submissions of any female in UFC history. Didn't get the sub in this one, but had been coming off a decision loss to Tabitha Ricci back in June. And once upon a time did fight Mayra Bueno Silva. That was all the way back in 2018, where she was submitted by Bueno Silva. And on to the other fights here. We will just quickly go through them. Sam Patterson submitted Johan Lainez by rear naked choke at 2 minutes, 3 seconds of the first round. And for Patterson, just seems like this is the weight class that he wants to be in moving forward. This guy, I mean, how he was making lightweight so consistently was stunning. I mean, he's a big guy. So I think this new weight class is going to fit him much better. Just got the back, threatened with the rear naked choke, and got the tap. Like it was pretty surgical precision here from Sam Patterson in terms of his game plan and executing it. Jasmine Jasudavicius defeated Priscilla Cachoeira by anaconda choke, 4:21 of the third round. This was a massacre. Jasudavicius just destroyed her. The official count was 326 total strikes landed for Jasudavicius to 26 for Cachoeira. One of the judges, Sal D'Amato, gave the second round a 10-7. Not too often you see a 10-7, because when you're talking about a 10-7, odds are the fight should have been stopped if we're talking about a realistic 10-7, but they didn't need the judges' scorecards, because in the third, Cachoeira actually landed a pair of strikes on the feet, but then Jasudavicius got her down to side control, and Cachoeira is just a mess here. She is bleeding all over the place, and Jasudavicius worked from north-south, got the mounted choke, and submitted her with the anaconda. 4:21 of the third round, and what happened was on Thursday, actually, it was Jasudavicius that got contacted that that Cachoeira was having trouble making weight, and they ended up contracting this at bantamweight instead of flyweight. However, Cachoeira was still docked 30% of her purse. So it wasn't a case of just moving it to another weight class and all was fine. Like there was a deduction for Cachoeira. And the card way back in the early hours of Saturday evening, Jimmy Flick getting an arm triangle submission over Malcolm Gordon. This was tough for Malcolm Gordon because, man, he came out aggressive and he was looking really good. Got a takedown in the first and was working in Flick's guard, landing a lot of ground and pound. Then Flick tried for a triangle and Gordon broke out, landing more elbows. And while he's in the guard, Gordon goes for a guillotine and Flick gets on top and turns it into a Von Flue/Von Flick choke. But Gordon withstands, and Flick thought if he had 15 more seconds, he would have got the submission here. He said he heard Gordon gurgling, but got saved by the horn. In the second, Gordon is teeing off with punches, like a lot of aggression here, landed a knee, and then Flick just gets his back, takes Gordon down, and he moves to the arm triangle and submits Gordon at 1:17 of round number 2. And here is Jimmy Flick reflecting on this, and this another fight where there was a weight miss on the side of Malcolm Gordon.
Back to the weight cut, you mentioned the pressure you already had on your shoulders coming into this fight. Was the weight miss, did it take you some time to kind of just, here's another obstacle in my way, or was it something that it didn't play with your head as much?
No, it just told me that I knew that he had some quit in him, and all I had to do was find that quit out there. I have no quit in me. If I had some quit in me, I wouldn't have made weight. Thursday morning, actually, when I woke up, I was 6-7 pounds from making weight. I cut twice Thursday. I drank very little water. I didn't eat food for 30 hours to make weight. I went to bed Thursday night at 127.4, and I woke up Friday morning at 126. I would have liked that drink of water. I would have liked that, piece of bread. I would have liked something, but the win was way better.
Does this feel like a unique win in the sense of all the things that you had against yourself, and I mean just the reaction you had going out there, and here you came through all these obstacles? Does this win kind of set itself apart, just given it was such a different outcome if this doesn't go your way?
Most definitely, and round 1 was an obstacle as well. Started out real bumpy. I went for a crappy takedown, then I got taken down. I got hit with a lot of big shots, and he was finding his way with me in there in round 1. But we have a 3-round fight. This is 15 minutes, and until that bell sounds or until the ref pulls you off of me, the fight is not over, and I'm not going to quit.
That was Jimmy Flick, who kicked off the night. This was a long card. I mean, when Neal Magny beat Mike Malott, we were 15 seconds away from 8 consecutive decisions, including back-to-back decisions in the 2 top championship fights. But that was UFC 297, and we'll get to the Dana White comments in a second. Don't want to jump over the fact that there was the announcement that Frankie Edgar is the first inductee into this year's Hall of Fame class. He will be going in to the modern wing. And here is my quick chat with Frankie Edgar after the announcement.
Since retirement, and obviously now coming off of this announcement, you're going to be asked so many questions about your career in the next couple of months. Are you someone that enjoys reflecting and looking at your big moments and speaking about yourself in that way, or are you a bit uncomfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a guy that likes to stroke myself too much. I'm not. Well, it depends. But you know what I'm saying. I'm not really a guy that's into patting myself on the back too much. But it's nice to talk about old memories. I mean, I still liked what I did. I'm proud of what I accomplished in the sport. So yeah, it's kind of two-edged.
And just the last one for me, how much the perception changed among people watching you after the first BJ fight? Was that a dramatic shift, or was it the second BJ Penn fight that really, in your mind, solidified to people this is the lightweight, and this was not a surprise the first time?
Yeah, definitely the second fight. The first fight, I had to convince myself that I could beat BJ, and then when I did that, the second fight, I knew I could. So then I kind of was able to put the stamp on it, but that solidified me, I think, and really introduced me to the world at that moment.
That's Frankie Edgar, the first inductee into the 2024 Hall of Fame class. I don't think you're going to find anyone arguing Frankie Edgar's inclusion into the UFC Hall of Fame. I mean, this guy was just, it's a remarkable story of a guy that came in in the UFC in 2007. And this is someone like, look at this path into the UFC. Like, yes, it is 6 fights before he gets to the UFC, but his last 2 stops before he gets signed by the UFC are Jim Miller for Reality Fighting, and prior to that, Davidus Torresevicius, which might not be a name that is rolls off the tongue or the memory bank of every fan, but a real fighter. Like, this was somebody that would fight in the IFL, fought in WEC, and even, you know, later into his career, becoming a champion at Ring of Combat as well. I mean, it was, you know, you're fighting Jim Miller outside of the UFC just to get in. And I mean, his first fight in the UFC is Tyson Griffin. And that's sort of the story of his career, was always the undersized Frankie Edgar, who found remarkable success at a weight class he never should have been fighting at. But in 2007, it was lightweight or nothing. This was not the era of featherweight or bantamweight in the UFC, much less flyweight. And, you know, throughout his career, he would challenge for titles at 135 and 145, but he became champion at 155. And, you know, it's interesting. You can look at different chapters of his career. You can separate them by the weight classes that he competed at being a top ranked fighter in all 3 of those weight classes. I think over time, the series of fights with Gray Maynard are the ones that are most closely associated with Frankie Edgar, in particular, just the drama of UFC 125 and fighting to that draw, and one of the ultimate comebacks after that first round by Frankie Edgar, and then the rematch at 136 that year. They had a fight prior to that back in 2008. So those 3 fights are ones that I think maybe are his most famous fights that he has had, including the second and third, in particular the second. But from a legacy building standpoint, I mean, it's time and place. But when you go back to 2010 and Frankie Edgar is going into 112 against BJ Penn, this is when BJ Penn is it at lightweight. This is arguably one of, if not the best fighters in the world. Someone that had gone up to welterweight, had the loss to George St. Pierre in the rematch the prior year, but lost nothing in terms of his reputation and his standing at lightweight. Came back, did a huge number, I remember, at UFC 101 on that card, which also did feature Anderson Silva and Forrest Griffin, but I mean, had become a giant star. And this was his weight class. So, I mean, you would be hard pressed to find too many that were picking Frankie Edgar to beat BJ Penn at UFC 112. Edgar won by unanimous decision. It was not without a lot of debate among people, so they ran it back. And then at UFC 118, it was a definitive win by Frankie Edgar, and that took him into the series of fights with Gray Maynard. But I mean, you can go through so many. Like, I remember the back-to-back fights with Benson Henderson, which were so close. I mean, you can watch those, and I mean, you're talking about inches in terms of the difference of scoring of those fights. And someone that just reinvented himself many times throughout his career. You saw him, you know, just fight the who's who at all 3 of these weight classes, right up until fighting Chris Gutierrez in 2022, and you know, it was just a series of knockout losses that led to his retirement. And interestingly enough, like in that press conference with the media, you know, it's like he did not want to retire, and you know, he's not looking for fights. He's not seeking out a comeback. But man, he sounded like a guy that mentally has not. The door might be closed, but it has not been locked mentally. It is a tough transition sometimes for fighters. And you can tell, like, this is a guy very much wired in that Chuck Liddell sort of way. Like, this is how the man, a big part of how he defines himself. But, you know, a celebrated figure in mixed martial arts is Frankie Edgar, one of the most popular fighters. And he will be part of the modern wing going into the Hall of Fame, presumably, as always, International Fight Week, which as we'll move over to Dana White, when Conor McGregor did make the announcement of June 29th, and I'm going to be fighting Michael Chandler at middleweight, you know, Dana White was definitely kind of throwing the cold blanket on that one, that in terms of the whether Conor will be fighting on that particular date. And it would seem that it would be, you know, obviously there's been no official announcement by the UFC, and it's been weeks since Conor McGregor just randomly threw out all of that, those announcements as well. But let's focus on this. So at the UFC press conference, I did bring up to Dana White about the language, the comments by Sean Strickland this past Wednesday at Media Day, which we talked about on the show, and I felt it was only fair that we had talked about it, that get Dana White's perspective on it. And certainly, I am just getting slammed for this, and that's totally fine. When you are attending these events and you're going to put your comments, your questions out there, it is completely fair game that if there's going to be blowback on you, you just have to accept that, and that's perfectly fine. If people felt it was out of place or whatever you want to call me, like, believe me, it's more than fair. But for those that maybe are not aware, let's hear. This is the exchange that I had with Dana White, and sort of the idea of, is there a line when it comes to where fighters are going to go with their thoughts, with their language. And let's keep in mind the fact that one thing that to me was at least like a differential here is the fact that on Wednesday, like, this was not promotion for a fight. Like, we certainly see where things go to a darker side, and it's the caveat that this is the fight business and they're going to get into a cage and they're going to fight. This was separate from that. This was not in relation to the comments from Dricus du Plessis at the press conference. This had nothing to do with Dricus du Plessis. This was Alexander Lee bringing up past homophobic and transphobic comments by Sean Strickland and asking him to share his thoughts of this and what are, like, to answer for these comments that a lot of people have taken issue with. And is that the kind of language that you are okay with? So here is my exchange with Dana White.
Since retirement, and obviously now coming off of this,
that was Frankie Edgar. We're not going to hear from him again.
You obviously give a long leash to your fighters about, what they can say when they are up there with the UFC microphone, and you are getting into territory of homophobia, transphobia. Like, is there...
I don't give anybody a leash.
Well, I'm saying you...
A leash?
I'm like...
Free speech. And control what people say. Going to tell people what to believe. Going to tell people... I don't fucking tell any other human being what to say, what to think, and there's no leashes on any of them. What is your question?
I was asking that question. I'll move on, though.
Yeah, probably a good idea. That's ridiculous to say I give somebody a leash. Free speech, brother. People can say whatever they want, and they can believe whatever they want. And I don't think there's any... We had two gay women who fought in the co-main event. They sat on the stage with Sean Strickland. They could give a shit what Sean Strickland thinks, or what he says, or what his beliefs are, or what his opinions are. You know what I mean?
So there you have it. That was my brief exchange there with Dane. And there was actually follow-up questions that I wanted to get to, and we will hear from those. But first of all, I on a silver platter gave him, like, the word leash. That, yes, I wish I used latitude. You know what I mean? But it's like, what are we arguing here? Are we really getting into the semantics here of, like, a very commonly used expression that, listen, I gave people here is a loaded gun. Come at me. And that's what I got today. Fair game. So my intent there, and I wish I, had the chance to better get my question out. But as you could see, like, Dana, like, I got my response. I got his insight, and that was everything was in his answer, was that there's no line. There is no line that you cannot cross, that obviously he is not going to tell people what to say. But let's not have just the most short-term memory. Let's just go as far as last month when he was asked about Colby Covington bringing up Leon Edwards' dead father. And that, yeah, he wasn't crazy about that. He doesn't like that type of thing. I mean, that was only a month ago. Everyone has a line. It's just, where is yours? This is not about policing people. This is not about, we can make this all a free speech discussion. We can make it all these grand attacks on people's freedoms. It's really not. It is, like, at its core, what are you, the consumer, comfortable with? Believe me, if you want to go to my mentions, you can see that the latitude, you like that word, is immense, that you can say whatever you want. And are we comfortable of a setting, not someone on their Twitter account, not someone outside doing some separate interview on their own YouTube channel. No, at a UFC press event, going into subjects that are not connected to the fight that they are promoting in any sense, but to, like, please go and read the comments from Sean Strickland. Better yet, listen to the comments from Sean Strickland and understand, like, at its core, is this good for your business? I would actually argue they have not felt any kind of detriment from this. But if you are going to allow your fighters to go in this direction, I wish I had just stated, like, is there absolutely no line that is too far? If we were talking about a racist tirade, fair game? Or is that what we want at a UFC event? I am not trying to just play gotcha or leading questions or any of that is just low-hanging fruit to just come back and dismiss the conversation and turn it into something else. Let's not go all that far back to the pandemic when one person named Dana White had stated that you are not going to get politics here when you tune into a UFC broadcast. No one wants to hear that stuff when they tune in to the UFC. So which is it? Is this free? Is that a lack of free speech? Are there fans that are being turned off by certain things like this? And believe me, was this on the broadcast proper? No, it was not. This was a UFC event that you have to go no further than the UFC's own YouTube channel to hear that tirade on Wednesday with reporter Alexander Lee. And I guess that would have been my better question if I could have gotten it out there. But I got my answer. Like, in a nutshell, I got my answer based on Dana. I just wish I didn't drop that word leash that everyone jumps on, and my mistake. But if it wasn't that, it probably would have been something else. As another reporter said to me right after, dude, Dana's very good at this. And, he gave me his answer and shut that down. So that's fine. I got as much insight as I was seeking from Dana White in terms of his thought on it. Like, he was either going to say that, or he was going to say, yeah, people don't want to hear that type of thing when they're tuning in for a UFC press event. And he did not say that. So I think the idea that you have like any line to expect that is within or is out of bounds, I mean, he's pretty much stating, no, there is not. That they can say whatever they want, and free speech, it also includes hate speech that sometimes it can veer into. And I think it did this past week. Now, as I mentioned, I had multiple topics I wanted to get to with Dana, and this was a very limited time that you have. So on a 180, here's me asking about the upcoming ESPN rights renewal, because their deal with ESPN goes through 2025. And a couple of months ago, Dana had stated that he was going to be sitting down with ESPN, which is relatively early. Like, you've still got a lot of time left on this deal, and a follow-up about a super weekend with WWE.
Go ahead. What do you got?
I want to go back as well. A number of months ago, you spoke with Sports Business Journal about that you were going to be sitting down with Jimmy Pitaro and talking about the future at ESPN beyond 2025. That was several months ago. At this point, are you still in the midst of like early negotiations, and are you envisioning post 2025 and ESPN being a big part of those?
Yeah, our deal is coming up, and yeah, I believe that talks will begin here with ESPN within the next 3 or 4 months.
And my last question, just because Mark Shapiro's talked a bit about the idea of these kind of super weekends with WWE, of going to a site one night, a WWE event, another night, a UFC event. Do you think that type of thing works? And do you think that there are strategic ways to cross-promote between the two when there are distinct audiences as well that come with these products.
Could not agree with you more. I don't think, what I think is, if you take a city, I don't know, let's take a city like New York, Los Angeles, and any of the major cities, and you have both events the same weekend, right? I think you're going to bring in a lot of people that aren't the same people. And I think it would be very big for some of these major cities. I think it's what you're looking for is an economic impact. You want hotels to be sold out. You want restaurants to be filled. You want people out shopping and hanging out. And yeah, I think that the WWE, the UFC, and a lot of other of our properties could definitely do that.
Would those likely be international destinations, or?
I think they could be anywhere. I think they could be international. I think they could be in the United States. We could literally do that anywhere. We both have, between us and the UFC, we both have pretty big followings, and I agree with you that they're not the same fan base.
So there you go. That is Dana White talking about the ESPN deal, which, I mean, as we focus so much on the AEW domestic television package and the Raw rights that are still going to be up in the air this year until those agreements are up at the end of September. I mean, the UFC package is going to be the next big one to focus upon, because, I mean, here is the value of that ESPN rights package, not just the domestic television rights, but the streaming rights as well that include the UFC pay-per-views, is a juggernaut. And it's been as such for ESPN Plus. I mean, it is, to me, of great value to both sides to be together and to extend this relationship. But I mean, whenever these rights are up, you're always looking at your increase in rights fees and driving those as high as you can. And part of the ingredient to increasing that is the number of bidders that you have and what other interest there is. You have a lot of streaming companies that are just gigantic losses. And what is a pathway forward? Having the UFC package. And here is something that is a proven winner that can drive its fan base to spend money on a product once a month on your streaming service. That's a hell of a tool to have if you are one of these streaming services, whether you are an Amazon Prime, whether you're a Peacock. But for so many reasons, the synergies between ESPN and UFC, I mean, just look at the growth. UFC has reached unbelievable levels business-wise. And I think like the relationship with ESPN has aided that. And conversely, I think the UFC, they have helped build ESPN Plus, but that's one to watch. And the super weekends have been discussed quite often. And I think you definitely sense from Dana the fact that, you know, this is a new world in TKO and that you are working alongside a product in WWE that I think Dana White greatly respects, and the people attached with WWE. I think he also sees a need to distinguish UFC from WWE and does not want to, I don't even know if confuse the audience is one, but rather I think wants to respect his audience by not forcing upon a different product that they are averse to. And I think that is, I think of like, at least when you read between the lines at times from Dana, is the idea that, yes, both big audiences, but you know, there was a time when that Venn diagram had plenty in the middle. And I think we're at a period where it's much more distinct and it's closer to a sliver now of crossover. And that could be of great value when you're selling these shows. You know, as much like site fees are a huge part of the business plan at TKO, is taking these shows, piggybacking off of one another and commanding a large site fee. And it's way more attractive if you can go to a municipality, to a local government, and state that, hey, we are going to bring in 2 nights, WWE, UFC, and there's going to be, okay, we can fit 60,000 people in a stadium, and there's going to be 70% uniques on each given night between the two that are going to bring. Like the crossover, it's not like 1 for 1. It is, we're going to be bringing our own audiences, and that's great news for double the hotel space, double the restaurant space. And that, I think, is the big feature here, that it's actually great that you have a distinction between the two audiences, and that will travel and that you can make a big weekend out of. that's certainly something to watch for 2024. So there you go, everyone. That was the UFC 297 coverage, and we appreciate all of you tuning in for this show. We are here each month after each UFC numbered event. We will be back after UFC 298 with Eric Marcotte. The UFC will be off next weekend. It's a rare weekend off, and then they come back on February the 3rd, and that will be an Apex card that is going to be headlined by Roman Dolidze and Nasruddin Imavov. Also, Hanato Moicano taking on Drew Dober. The weekend after that, February the 10th, it's Jack Hermanson against Joe Pyfer. And then 298 is February the 17th at the Honda Center in Anaheim. Alexander Volkanovski against Ilya Topuria on top for the 145-pound championship. Ian Machado Gary taking on Jeff Neal. Merab Dvalishvili against Henry Cejudo. Amanda Lemos takes on Mackenzie Dern. Also on this card, Robert Whitaker against Paulo Costa, those being some of the key fights coming up on February the 17th. And then we're into what are going to be several big months for the UFC. UFC 299 is a monster. That is happening March the 9th. And then the big one is UFC 300 on April the 13th in Las Vegas. And Dana White just stating that the main event of UFC 300 will be announced soon. So it is not Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway headlining this card. It is not Zhang Weili and Yao Xiaonan headlining this card. Rather, a main event still to be announced from the UFC coming up soon. So thanks to everyone again for joining us. And we will be back on Monday night with Rewind to Raw with myself and Wei Ting. And also tonight coming up, it is Nate Milton, Andrew Thompson, and Chris Ely with the NWA podcast. That will be live here at 8 Eastern on the Post YouTube channel. And that is it for me. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. This has been your UFC 297 review.